Well, now, you ever have one of those mornings when a smell, or maybe just a little sound, brings a whole memory flooding back, so clear you can almost reach out and touch it?
That happened to me just the other day. I was sitting out on my back porch. It was early. The sun just peeking over them pine trees out yonder, air all thick with jasmine and honeysuckle. I had my cup o' coffee, strong, like I like it, and then, well, a far-off sound came driftin' through the air. One of them old freight trains, low and steady, off in the distance. And darlin', let me tell ya, that sound just carried me straight back to a certain summer mornin', long, long ago, 1961, if I'm rememberin' right, when my life took a turn I surely never expected. Now, I was just 20 years old that summer. Barely out of girlhood, really. Born and raised in a small town right here in Georgia, one o' them places where the days seemed slow, the nights warm, and everybody knew everybody else's business. Folks expected certain things back then. You grow up nice, marry a good man, raise a family, maybe work part-time at the church or a library if you felt a bit restless. College? Oh honey, that wasn't really something for a girl like me leastways. That's what everybody said. But sometimes life, well, it has its own ideas. That particular day, I was boarding a long-distance train heading up to North Carolina to visit my great-aunt Maybelle. First time I'd ever traveled that far alone. Oh, I was nervous, sure, but there was a little flicker of excitement in me too. Something new, something unknown waiting out there. I can still remember the feel of that worn leather suitcase in my hand, the polished wood of the train car, the scent of coffee drifting from the diner car, the way the sunlight danced through those velvet curtains. And it was on that train, oh yes, on that very ride, that I met someone, a young man, kind and thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to see clear through the everyday. He wasn't just making small talk. No, sir. He spoke of books, dreams, life beyond the little town borders, things I hadn't dared to imagine much before. And something in me, well, something shifted that day. Now, darlin', why do I tell you this today after all these years? 'Cause sometimes, sugar, just one small encounter, one conversation in the most unexpected place, can set your whole life down a different track. And as I sit here now, 82 years old, with plenty of miles behind me, I still think on that train ride. It's funny, ain't it? The way one day, one moment, can stay in your heart forever. So, if you'll sit with me a spell, pour yourself a cup o' tea, or coffee if you prefer. I'll tell you the whole story. Maybe it'll make you think on your own moments too. Ready? Let's begin. When I think back on them early years, sugar, it feels like opening an old, worn photo album. Pages tinnin' soft beneath my fingers, each picture bringing back the scents, the sounds, the very feeling of those times. I was born and raised in a small town down in Georgia, not much more than a crossroads back then. Dirt roads, white painted porches, swinging screens that creaked when you pushed 'em open. Folks would sit out on the veranda in the evenings, fanning themselves with old church bulletins, swatting away the skeeters while the crickets chirped their lil chorus. Life moved slow, honey, real slow, like molasses in January. My folks were simple people. Daddy ran a little feed store. He could tell you the weight of a sack o' grain just by lifting it in his hands. Mama? Oh, she was the heart of our home. Always cooking something, biscuits in the morning, fried chicken come Sunday. I can still hear her hummin' as she worked, some old hymn passed down from her mama's mama. We weren't rich, but child, we had what mattered, a roof over our heads, food on the table, folks who cared for us. I grew up believin' the world was a kind place, where good manners and good hearts counted for something. I truly believed that kindness was the most important thing, and that people, well, they always came back to where they belonged. I suppose that was the way of things then, a bit simpler, maybe a bit naive. As a little girl, I'd run barefoot through the fields, hair all wild, skirt catchin' on the tall grass. I'd climb up into that old pecan tree in our backyard, my secret perch where I could look out across the town, watchin' the world go by. Summers seemed endless then, with days so hot the tar on the road would bubble beneath your feet, and nights so soft you'd fall asleep to the lullaby of cicadas. By the time I turned 18, the world had started changin', but down in our corner of Georgia, some things stayed the same. Folks still gathered at the church socials, still danced at the county fair, still whispered the same old stories over pie and coffee. I was a young woman then, 20 years old, when this story begins, with dreams that, truth be told, didn't stretch much beyond what I'd always known. The girls I grew up with, most of 'em married their sweethearts straight out of high school. That was just the way of things. You settled down, had babies, kept a good house. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a beauty in that kind of life. But something inside me, quiet and soft as it was, longed for, well, for more. I didn't have the words for it back then. I just knew that sometimes, sittin' beneath that pecan tree, watchin' the trains in the far-off distance, I'd wonder what lay beyond them hills. I loved to read, oh honey, books were my window to the wide, wide world. I'd devour anything I could get my hands on, Jane Austen, Louisa May Alcott, even them old dusty encyclopedias at the library. Through those pages, I traveled to places I never thought I'd see. But dreamin' was one thing. Steppin' out of the life you'd always known, that was something else. Folks around town would shake their heads, say, now, why would a nice girl like you go chasin' after something different? And I reckon, part of me believed 'em. So when the chance came that summer, that invitation to visit Aunt Maybelle up in North Carolina, it felt like a tiny door swingin' open. I didn't know then just how much that one lil' trip would come to mean. I remembered that morning clear as day. The air was thick with the promise of summer heat, even though the sun had barely lifted itself over the horizon. Mama had packed me a small basket, a few biscuits, a jar of peach preserves, and a folded handkerchief with my initials stitched in the corner. Daddy had insisted on carrying my suitcase to the station, his strong hand steady on my shoulder as we walked. He didn't say much, never was a man of many words, but I could feel the weight of his quiet love in that gentle grip. Mama, on the other hand, fussed right up until I boarded, her voice soft but hurried, tellin' me to be careful, to mind my manners, to ride soon. I promised I would. The station was small, just a simple platform with peeling paint and old benches worn smooth by years of waitin' passengers. When that great iron train pulled in, huffin' and puffin' like some old dragon, my heart gave a little flutter. I hadn't ever been on a train before, not like this. There was a thrill in it, and maybe a touch of fear too. I found my seat near the window, velvet cushions faded with time, the woodwork sheen beneath years of polish. The car smelled of coffee, old leather, and something faintly sweet, maybe perfume from a lady who'd passed through earlier. I settled in, hands folded prim in my lap, trying to look composed even though my heart was beating faster than a rabbit's. It wasn't long before he came aboard. A young man, maybe 25 or so, tall, with dark hair that curled a bit at the collar, a stack of books tucked under one arm. He wore a simple suit, the kind a schoolteacher might wear, and when his eyes met mine, he gave the smallest nod, polite, but with a warmth that lingered. There was something about him, not just his look, but the way he carried himself, easy, thoughtful, like a man who'd seen a little more of the world. He took the seat across from me, settling in with a quiet sigh, opening one of his books. For a while we sat in companionable silence, the train rockin' gently, wheels clicking out a steady rhythm. I snuck glances now and then, curious despite myself. Finally, he looked up, catching me mid-peak. I blushed, turning quick to the window, but he just smiled, that soft, kind smile that sets a person at ease. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low, warm, with the faintest trace of some northern accent. He asked where I was heading, and before I knew it, we were talking first about small things, then about books, about life beyond the little towns we both came from. He told me he was a literature teacher, just starting out, traveling home for the summer. I told him about my aunt in Carolina, about our small town ways. And as the miles rolled by beneath us, so did the words, easy, natural, like a stream flowing over smooth stones. I couldn't explain it then, but something in me stirred. My heart beat just a bit quicker, not from romance, no, it wasn't that kind of feeling, but from the widening of my world. He spoke of ideas, of places, of dreams that stretched far beyond the borders I'd always known. It was as if, in that moment, a window had been opened, and I was breathing in air I'd never tasted before. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation would stay with me, changing the very path I thought I was on. It was a small thing, really, two young souls talking on a train, but sometimes, sugar, it's those little moments that set the whole course of a life in motion. Life, sugar, isn't always as kind as we hope, and not long after that train ride, I found myself caught in a storm I wasn't quite ready for. You see, back in those days, especially where I grew up, things had a way of sticking to tradition tighter than the vines clinging to the old oak trees out back. When I got home from my trip, that new fire I'd felt, this longing for something more than just the small-town life, well, it wasn't met with the kind of warm embrace I'd imagined. Mama and Daddy, bless their hearts, they loved me true, but they had their own ideas about what a young woman's place should be. They wanted me settled down, near the family, married maybe, raising children, just like their folks before Anne. When I told them about thinking of college, about studying, about maybe changing the life I'd always known, there was a silence that felt heavier than any summer storm. I couldn't quite put into words the storm brewing. Inside me, fear, doubt, shame even. The shame of wanting something more when everyone around me was content with less. Friends whispered behind closed doors, neighbors gave their disapproving looks, and sometimes I could almost hear it in their voices when they said, "She's changin', not for the better." I felt like I was standing on the edge of two worlds, neither one quite mine. Inside, I wrestled with my own fears. Was I being selfish? Was I letting down the people who loved me? Would I ever be enough if I stepped off the path they'd set for me? There were nights I cried into my pillow, wondering if this hunger for change was worth all the worry it cost. But even in the thick of that doubt, there was a small, steady light inside me, a whisper that kept saying, "Keep going. You belong to more than just this town." Thankfully, I wasn't alone. Aunt Maybelle, bless her soul, was my refuge. When I visited her, she listened without judgment, her eyes kind and understanding. She'd lived her own life differently, had traveled and learned beyond the county lines, and she encouraged me to dream big, even when it scared me. Those moments with her were like balm on a weary heart, giving me strength to keep fastened the doubts and the stares. Still, the question loomed large: how could I chase these new dreams without breaking the hearts of those who loved me? How to be true to myself and still keep the ties that bound me to home? It was a delicate dance, and some days the weight of it all felt nearly too much to bear. But darling, I learned something important in those hard times. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stand firm in your truth, even when the world around you shakes its head. That summer marked the beginning of a journey, not just on a train or to a college town, but a journey deep inside my own soul, where I had to face fears and make peace with who I was meant to be. And that, honey, is the kind of story worth telling. I remember it like it was yesterday, though the years have folded over it like pages in an old book. That moment when everything stood still, like the whole world held its breath just for me. I was sitting on the creaky porch steps, the evening air heavy with humidity, the cicadas buzzing their endless song. News had just come in. My dreams, as fragile as they were, had hit a wall I hadn't seen coming. You see, it wasn't just about following my heart or chasing knowledge anymore. It was about losing something I never thought I'd lose. The letter arrived that day, plain and simple, but its words hit me like a storm. My great Aunt Maybelle, the woman who had been my beacon, my safe harbor, the one who believed in me when no one else did, she was gone. Passed away quietly in her sleep, far away from the town I'd come to think of as my only home. I remember feeling my breath catch in my throat, my hands trembling as I held that folded piece of paper. Time seemed to freeze. The sun dipped below the horizon and left me in a twilight of sorrow and disbelief. In that silence, I realized how much I depended on her, how her faith in me had been the light guiding me through the darkest nights. Without her, the path ahead felt lonelier than ever. I also saw, clearer than ever, that my dreams weren't just mine, they were hers too, passed down like a precious heirloom. Losing her wasn't just about grief. It was like losing a part of my own courage. But even in that deep ache, something stirred within me. I knew I couldn't let her belief in me fade away. I had to carry it forward, no matter the cost. That day changed me. I understood that life's hardest moments don't break us, they shape us. They carve out spaces inside our hearts for strength and hope we never knew we had. I made a choice then, sitting there in the heavy southern heat, feeling the weight of loss and love tangled together. I chose to keep moving, to keep dreaming, to honor the promise I made to myself and to Maybelle. It wasn't easy. The dots didn't just disappear overnight, and sometimes the loneliness pressed down hard. But that moment, as painful as it was, became the turning point. From that day on, I wasn't just a girl from a small town with big dreams. I was a woman who had faced loss and found the courage to step into her own light. And darling, if you ever find yourself caught in a storm like that, remember, sometimes it's the heartbreak that leads us to our true selves. After that storm, after the thunder and the lightning had passed, I found myself in a kind of silence I'd never known before. It was like the whole world had slowed down to a whisper, and in that quiet, I was left alone with my thoughts, my memories, and a heart that felt somehow both heavy and hollow. The days after losing Aunt Maybelle were some of the loneliest I've ever faced. I'd wake up in the morning, expecting to hear her soft voice or see her warm smile, only to be met with the emptiness of a house that suddenly felt too big, too still. The small town around me carried on, as it always did, the same folks, the same slow rhythms of life. But for me, everything had changed. It's funny how loss can rearrange the whole landscape of your soul. I was no longer the wide-eyed girl full of dreams and hope. I was different, quieter, more cautious, carrying a kind of sadness that didn't show on the surface, but lived deep inside. My faith in people, in the kindness of the world, wavered. I wondered if the dreams I'd once held on to so tightly were just fragile illusions, meant to be shattered. I felt like I'd been walking through a fog, trying to find my way, but not sure where the path led anymore. Sometimes I questioned whether I was strong enough to keep going. But in those long, quiet nights, I found little sparks, moments of grace and strength that helped me heal, bit by bit. A kind word from a neighbor, a letter from a friend, the comforting rhythm of the seasons changing. Slowly, I started to understand that grief isn't something you just get over. It's something you learn to carry with you, like a shadow that walks beside you on sunny days. And in carrying that shadow, I found a new kind of courage. I learned to accept that I was no longer the same girl who had climbed that pecan tree dreaming of distant places. I had been shaped and reshaped by loss, by love, by the quiet endurance of everyday life. And that was okay. It was part of my story. Through that silence, I began to find a new kind of peace, not the loud joy of youth, but a deeper, gentler strength. My faith, once shaken, was slowly rebuilt, not always in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts of trust. Trust in myself, in the goodness still present in the world, in the idea that life, with all its twists and turns, is worth living fully. So, while the silence was heavy, it was also necessary. It was the space where I could breathe, reflect, and prepare for the next chapter of my life. And darling, sometimes in the quiet after the storm, we find the roots that hold us steady, ready to grow again. After those long months of quiet, darling, something inside me began to stir again. It wasn't a sudden spark or a grand event, no, it was more like the gentle break-in of dawn, slow and soft, easing its way over the hills. I started to notice little things that had once seemed ordinary but now felt full of promise. One afternoon, while walking through the town square, I saw Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, struggle with her groceries. Without thinking twice, I stepped over and offered my help. She looked at me with surprise, then a warm smile spread across her face. That simple act, carrying her bags, sharing a laugh, reminded me there was still kindness in the world and a place for me in it. It was like that, little by little. A stray dog I stopped to pet, a book I found at the library that spoke to my restless heart, a letter from a friend encouraging me to keep dreaming. Each moment, a tiny nudge pushing me forward. And one day, a thought took root that wouldn't let go. Maybe, just maybe, I could take that next step I'd once been too afraid to try. The idea of going back to school, of learning more, growing beyond the small town where I'd spent my whole life, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. It was scary, of course. The world beyond those familiar streets felt huge and unknown. But the memory of that train ride, of the young man who'd opened my eyes to new ideas, stayed with me like a gentle guide. I realized that my dreams weren't just flights of fancy, they were pieces of who I was meant to be. So I began to write letters, make inquiries, and take small steps toward making those dreams real. Sometimes I'd sit at my kitchen table, pen in hand, heart thumping, with nervous hope, wondering if I was making the right choice. But the fear was always met with a quiet strength deep inside, whispering, "You can do this." I also found comfort in my faith, not just in God, but in myself and the goodness of life. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to walk it. That summer marked a new beginning. I wasn't just the girl who left home on a train. I was a woman taking charge of her story, claiming her place in the world. And sugar, if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. Sometimes, the second chances don't come with fanfare or fireworks. They come quietly, in the gentle nudges of everyday moments, and in the courage to say yes to the unknown. So, whenever you feel lost or unsure, just look for those little sparks. They might just be the start of something beautiful. There came a day, sugar, when I realized that carrying the weight of my past was keeping me from moving forward. For years, I held on to every hurt, every doubt, every shadow of what might have been. But I learned that living in that kind of prison does no good for a soul. One afternoon, I sat by the window in my little home, sunlight spilling warm across the floor, and I made a choice, a real, honest choice, to let go. I pulled out an old box tucked away in the closet, filled with letters, photographs, little keepsakes from days long gone. Each one held a memory, some sweet, some bitter, but none of them deserved to chain me any longer. With trembling hands, I gathered them up and set them to the fire. Watching the flames dance and swallow those pieces of my past, I felt a strange kind of freedom seep into my bones. It wasn't about forgetting or dismissing where I'd come from. It was about choosing to live without the burden of pain and regret. That moment, darling, was the start of something new. I chose to live fully without looking back with anger or sorrow. I chose forgiveness not just for others, but for myself. I came to understand that the past shaped me, yes, but it did not define me. There was so much more life ahead, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. I remember whispering to myself, I choose to live on. No complaints, no regrets, just on. And that simple declaration changed everything. I stopped letting fear hold me prisoner and started walking toward my dreams with a heart lighter than I'd felt in years. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. No, ma'am, it never does. But I found peace in accepting its imperfections, in finding joy in the little things, in trusting that each new day brought a chance to grow. I began to see my story not as a chain that held me back, but as a tapestry, woven with threads of sorrow and joy, loss and love, struggle and triumph. And through it all, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I had. So, if you're listening and feeling weighed down by your own past, honey, let me tell you this. You have the power to let go, to forgive, to choose yourself again. Because life is a gift, fragile and fleeting, and it's up to each of us to make it beautiful in our own way. Looking back on my life, sugar, I see it like a river, sometimes smooth and calm, sometimes wild and unpredictable, but always moving forward. There's one thing I've learned, deep in my bones, that I want to share with you, not as some preachy advice, but as a truth carved from years of living. Life, you see, ain't about waiting for the perfect moment or for the world to hand you what you think you deserve. It's about seeing the chances right in front of you, even if they're wrapped in uncertainty or fear. When I was that young girl from Georgia, I thought life had a certain plan for me, a neat, straight road to happiness and comfort. But it didn't. What it had for me was a winding path, full of twists and turns, moments of heartbreak and joy, times I stumbled and times I soared. And through it all, I realized that the most important journey was the one I took inside myself. I learned that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to doubt, but what matters most is that you keep moving, keep reaching for the light, even when it feels just out of reach. I came to understand that small moments, like a conversation on a train, a kind word from a stranger, the courage to say yes to a new path, those are the true treasures. They might seem simple, but they hold the power to change everything. I've seen how one choice can ripple through a lifetime, opening doors you never knew existed. And darling, maybe that's the lesson I hope you'll carry with you today, that it's never too late to change your story, to find your own way, to dream a new dream. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for some big sign and start trusting the quiet nudges that come from your heart. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to do it alone. But you do have to take that first step. So, as I sit here now with all these years behind me, I want to tell you, life is a beautiful, messy, precious gift. And the courage to live it fully in your own way is the greatest strength you'll ever find. Maybe, just maybe, it's time for you to stop waiting and start living. Well, darling, here we are at the end of this little journey I've been sharing with you. It's funny how stories like these, ones from way back when, can still feel so alive, so close to the heart. But I want you to know this isn't just about some dusty memories or a girl from a small town who took a train ride in 1961. No, honey, it's about right now, today, and every day that comes after. It's about the ways our past shapes us, yes, but also about how we keep growing, keep changing, and keep holding on to hope. You see, that summer train ride wasn't just a trip, It was a moment where my life shifted, a tiny fork in the road that led me to places I never dreamed I'd go. And even now, after all these years, sometimes when the wind carries that faint whistle of a distant train, I wonder if he remembers me too. If somewhere, beyond the miles and the years, that same spark still lingers. And that brings me to you, Sugar. I want to ask you something that's been on my mind for a long time. Do you believe that true love, that kind of love that changes your heart and your life, should always find its way back? Is it meant to circle around, no matter the distance or the time? I don't have all the answers, darling, but I do know this. Life is full of surprises. Sometimes love takes strange paths, and sometimes it comes back when you least expect it. And sometimes, well, sometimes it teaches you how to love yourself first. As I sit here with the sun setting low and the cicadas singing their evening song, I hold on to that hope. Maybe he remembers me, just as I remember him. Maybe our lives, like those old train tracks, crossed and crossed again in ways I never fully understood. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of mystery that keeps life so beautifully alive. So as you walk your own path, I hope you carry a little piece of the story with you. I hope it reminds you to listen for the quiet moments that might change everything, to hold tight to your dreams, even when the road gets rough, and to keep your heart open to love, to hope, and to the endless possibilities that tomorrow holds. Now tell me, Sugar, what about you? What moment in your life changed everything? And do you believe that love, in all its forms, finds a way back home? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story, your dreams, your heart, because sometimes, when we speak our truths, we find we're never truly alone. And with that, I'll leave you with a little whisper from my soul. Sometimes, just sometimes, I think he remembers too.